With us now, Administrative Sergeant Dale Young with us on the MegaCast. Great to have you with us. How are you, Sergeant?
I'm doing well. How's everybody else?
We're recovering from the 4th of July holiday.
Yes. It's funny you guys should mention the storm, because I feel like we're still kind of shaking off the effects of that as well. So I certainly understand where you guys are coming from.
Right. It's been, and we forget about that. Police officers have to still be out patrolling. I don't know how many officers I've seen out directing traffic because of the lights being out. Can you tell us, Sergeant, too, when a traffic light is out, are you supposed to treat it as a four-way stop?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Right? So why can't people get that? If I remember correctly, it is a question on the test.
It is.
Yes. Yeah, I think that sometimes when things like that happen and it's unexpected, that sometimes I think people are just anxious to get home and sometimes forget.
So with that, Sergeant, if we can ask you, what exactly is the administrative sergeant?
So the administrative sergeant, my role that I'm currently in right now, I oversee our police service aides, our records clerks, maintenance, our custodial staff, and our mechanics. Essentially, I'm in charge of the overall building health, special projects, and generally lending support to the various bureaus within the department.
How long have you been with the department?
Well, I actually started as a police cadet in 2004, then moved to police officer in 2006. So I'm really kind of closing on my 15th year as a police officer.
Wow. Starting out as a cadet, those programs are really so important. Has it been everything that you thought it would be?
Yes, actually, I would say that and more, because it's really hard to define exactly what a police officer does, but I could definitely tell you I've had a great career, and it's certainly something that I would recommend to anyone that is interested in doing this line of work.
I will say you guys have a really cool video up on your Facebook page to try to recruit new people to the department. I love the slow motion action of the officers getting out of the squad car. It looks pretty cool.
Well, thank you very much, and I want to give a little shout out to Officer James Pettinato, who is our community police officer who helped produce that video.
So with that as well, can I ask you, Sergeant, I see here that you're also the lead instructor for self-defense and some of the other safety training for the police department. What when you're in that role, and in today's day and age, because law enforcement's changed even since you've been on the job, I would think.
Yes, very much so.
So when we're talking about use of force and self-defense, do you approach it differently today?
So I will tell you this. I think that, I guess nowadays especially, we're making an extra emphasis on the de-escalation portion of use of force. And so essentially what we're trying to do as a department is that we want to hopefully handle situations before we actually have to use physical force. However, not every situation can be handled and taken care of that way, so we do have to train on other ways that we can take a situation that might be a high-risk situation and bring it under control. And so that's one of the duties that I have, is to instruct our police officers with some techniques on how to do that.
So with that, it's always different though when you're actually in the moment. How do you train for that?
So some of the ways that we do that is through scenario-based training. Sometimes it's through the various discussions that are had after different incidents take place. We learn from each other, we learn from other classes and courses that we go to, and then we try to take those lessons learned and apply it in the moment. So we try to think through these things, hopefully, before it's even something that we encounter.
And, if I can ask you, we just had the professor on from Oakland University, and she is doing a new research project helping to train law enforcement officers when they come in contact and interact at traffic stops with people with autism. When you're an officer and you're pulling people over, try to give us the steps. You don't how hard is it to pull a car over and not know anything about the individual sitting behind the wheel?
That's a great question. And I would tell you that I'll go all the way back to being a brand new police officer, where you're really relying on that academy training. But generally speaking, and again, when I say general, I mean truly general. Normally, what happens is that an officer observes a motor vehicle violation of some sort. The officer then turns on their lights and sirens, and they try to time that so that the motorist would be able to pull over in a safe location.
Yeah.
Then from there,
I will say, every time those red lights come on, your heart starts to beat a little faster.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. But then after that, then when they pull into wherever that safe place is, that they would try to get out of the car and basically introduce themselves to the motorist and explain why they were stopped that day. So how the officer handles that is through the repetition and through practice of going through those steps, those motions. And like you were probably guessing, not every situation is exactly the same. But generally speaking, I would say, the majority of traffic stops usually just end in something completely benign.
So the question is always asked, should you keep your registration in your glove box, or is it better for an officer, from your safety standpoint, is it better for people to put it maybe in their visor?
So I would tell you that it's really preference. However, if for some reason it's going to be in a location that is going to be difficult to get to, or if the motorist is nervous, sometimes it's better just to wait for the officer to approach their car and just let the officer know that, hey, my registration, my insurance is located in the visor. Can I get it? The officer will always, of course, say yes, or even in the glove box. Or if there's an extenuating circumstances, the safest thing to do would be just to ask the officer if it's okay to go grab those materials.
See, I learn something new every day, and I've done, a few dozen ride-alongs with police officers in my time. Hey, with that, do you guys offer ride-alongs for the general public? Or I guess now it's just a little different with COVID still around.
So exactly. So with COVID, things are starting to open up slowly but surely. So right now, we're kind of in a holding pattern for that, but eventually, I would not be surprised if citizen ride-alongs was something that started to come back.
Again, we're talking with the Sergeant Dale Young over at the West Bloomfield Police Department. And Sergeant, I know that there's been a few other things going on there in the county. I saw on the Facebook page that a few days ago, the department had posted about a lot of larcenies out of cars. And it looks like just before, I don't even know if you know this, but just before we went on the show, it looks like you guys made an arrest. Can you talk about that at all, or?
So unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to add any more information than what was already disseminated at this time, just because that case would be considered ongoing at the moment. But certainly, if anybody out there has seen anything or has more information to share with us, we always encourage everyone to give us a call on our non-emergency number, and that's that 248-975-9200.
You guys do a really good job with your Facebook page and trying to keep the community up to date and informed. Can you tell me more about the task force, though, Sonic? I haven't heard of this one before.
Certainly. So Sonic is a consortium, and so they're made up of police officers from the West Bloomfield Police Department, from the Novi Police Department, and from the Farmington Hills Police Department. And so Sonic is a special unit made up of those officers that they handle a wide variety of types of cases, and they really help to boost the capabilities for our investigative purposes for the various detective bureaus, as well as sometimes they will do investigations related to narcotics. It just kind of depends on what the needs of the various departments are at that time. But it's a it's a group of detectives that are very they're like the high speed group.
That's a good analogy. How important is it for for departments to come together in collaboration and have some of these task force?
I personally, I think it's vital because crime has no boundaries, and so being able to pool the resources from your partners in the region and sometimes even out of state is invaluable. Because you'd be surprised at how often something that's happening in West Bloomfield could be something that's happening in Novi and Farmington Hills, or even, across the state. That's happened before as well. So I think that the more that we can work together, the better our capabilities are in law enforcement.
So with that, I understand there was an armed robbery recently at the JCC. Can you update us on that at all?
So just a general overview on that robbery is that it happened on July 4th, somewhere around noon. And in that particular situation, a resident was approached by a male suspect in the parking lot. So the ruse was to ask this individual for directions. And during that time, he pointed a handgun at the resident, and the resident handed over their belongings to him. The suspect then fled in an unknown direction by unknown means, and he's described as a black male in his 40s, 5'10", thin, muscular build. He's got a short black afro, acne scars on his face, and he was wearing dress clothes with fancy sunglasses at the time. So again, for everyone, if you have any additional information about that, please call us at 248-975-9200.
How unusual is it for us to have those types of crimes in this area? And we're talking in the middle of the day on a holiday.
Yes, thankfully low. And I think that, especially in this particular situation, I was very happy to see that, nobody was hurt.
Right, that's the most important thing. You can get, your wallet back and cancel your credit cards and do all of that, yes, but you can't get your life back. So, and so what advice do you give to people if they encounter a similar situation?
Well, similar situations like this, I think one of the most important thing is to remember that, unfortunately, they have to make some pretty difficult choices. But generally speaking, I think that complying with the individual and handing over your belongings, just as you stated earlier, it's much better to cancel credit cards, make insurance claims, whatever it is you need to do, and still be safe.
So, Sergeant, if I can ask you, about 15 years on the force, what's the coolest job you've ever held? Because there are so many different facets to police work.
So for me personally, it was the Detective Bureau and being a detective. I definitely enjoyed watching a case go from the initial police report and being responsible to get whatever other information that I needed to make sure that that case was presented properly in front of our prosecutors, and then ultimately seeing it through the court process. A lot of great memories there, and it's very rewarding.
So anyone out there thinking about going into law enforcement, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to, even if it's just a small inkling, give it a shot. There's many different departments, just like mine. Of course, I'm biased towards West Bloomfield. I love it. If you want to dip your toe in the water, you could be a police service aide potentially. You could be a dispatcher. If you want to be a police officer, by all means, come out, take a look at our department. In fact, believe it or not, we're hiring. So that is definitely something that I think people should be aware of, and certainly get more information from our social media, but also at our human resources page.
And we should say, too, it's not always a quick process or an easy process when you're getting hired by a law enforcement agency. However, it really is a service to the community. And so we want to say thank you to you and your entire team for always being on the job 24/7. You guys didn't get a break because of the 4th of July or take time off because of COVID. No remote work for you.
That's true. Very true. Thank you so much.
Well, we appreciate it. Again, Sergeant Dale Young with the West Bloomfield Police Department. Anything maybe I didn't ask that you want to add before we say goodbye?
One thing I'd like to point out to everyone is we recently took advantage of something called the Transparency Portal. And it's a very long address here, but if people were interested to take a look at some crime stats, see them visually represented with in a graph representation, I could certainly provide that. I could even put it into the chat if that would be easier. But I would encourage people that are curious to go there and just keep abreast of what their police department's doing.
You know, I love that you guys are doing that because it does help answer so many questions for people. If we can, we'll probably just go ahead and get that from you, and then when we post it to social media or to our website later, we can add that.
Yeah, just if you just send that link to Larry and to Ryan, who sent you the Zoom link for this morning's edition of the MegaCast, we can get that into our description when we post later on today.
All right, sounds great.
Well, we so appreciate your time. Thank you, and happy weekend to you.
Thanks, you too.